I never thought I'd be the kind of man to question his wife. Emily and I have been together for almost a decade, and for most of that time, I would have sworn on my life that she was rock solid. We had a steady life in Phoenix, a little world of our own, built on trust, hard work, and quiet moments. I ran my own custom furniture shop, Carter Woodworks, crafting everything from rustic farmhouse tables to hand-carved rocking chairs. Emily was in corporate real estate, working long hours, but she thrived on the adrenaline of closing a deal. We weren't flashy people. We didn't jet off to Europe for summer vacations or cruise around in overpriced luxury cars like some of her coworkers. I was perfectly content with my 1970 Ford F-100, restored by hand, one careful piece at a time. Emily, though, had always had an eye for the finer things. Her Acura MDX Type S was sleek and fresh off the lot, leased to her fam. Our life had been predictable, steady, at least, that's what I thought. I can't pinpoint exactly when that changed. Maybe it crept in slow, like termites eating away at the foundation of a house before you even noticed the damage. Lately, Emily had seemed different, distant, forgetful about the little things. She was rushing out the door more often, muttering something about networking events and late work dinners. And her phone, always face down. At first, I brushed it off. People get busy. Stress piles up. I told myself I was overthinking it. Then the phone call happened. It was a Wednesday evening, and I was out back in my workshop, sketching out plans for a walnut coffee table. The Arizona air was thick, humid, the kind that clings to your skin long after the sun starts sinking behind the skyline. The scent of fresh-cut cedar mixed with sawdust from an order I'd been working on earlier. A cold beer rested on my workbench, condensation sliding down the bottle. Then the landline rang. We still have one, not because we really needed it, but because I liked the idea of having something that didn't rely on cell towers. It almost never rang, so when it did, I wiped my hands on my jeans and headed inside. I picked up on the second ring. Hello? Hey, Ethan. It's Rachel, Emily's best friend. I could hear the faint clatter of dishes in the background, like she was cooking dinner. How are you? Doing fine, I said, glancing toward the hallway. Emily's not here if you're trying to reach her. Oh, no. Actually, I was calling to invite you both to dinner this Saturday, Rachel said, her voice light. Just a little get-together at our place. Nothing fancy. Emily said she didn't have any plans, so I figured, why not? I frowned. She told you that? Yeah, Rachel answered, something shifting in her tone. Then, after a slight pause, she told me she was going to your bachelorette party this weekend. A pause. A long one. The kind of silence that stretches just enough to make your pulse pick up. Oh, Rachel said again, softer this time. Right. Must have been a mix-up. A mix-up. I forced a chuckle, keeping my voice steady. Yeah, probably. We wrapped up the conversation soon after. I told her I'd check in with Emily, and Rachel hesitated before saying, yeah, sure. Let me know. When I hung up, I just stood there, staring at the wall. The first real crack. I had spent years trusting Emily without a second thought. Never checked her phone. Never pried into her work trips. Never once questioned a late night at the office. But now, there was this knot in my stomach, tight, twisting. That night, Emily came home around 9:30 p.m., later than usual. She walked through the door in a sharp navy blue pantsuit, looking polished, put together. But something was off. Maybe it was the way she avoided my eyes. Or how she set her Louis Vuitton purse down on the kitchen counter so carefully, like she was lost in thought. Hey, she said, forcing a smile. Long day. I watched as she slipped off her heels, flexing her toes against the cool tile floor. How was work? I asked, keeping my voice even. She let out a sigh. Exhausting. Had to deal with a client who kept flip-flopping on a commercial property in Uptown. She ran a hand through her hair, tossing it over her shoulder. God, I need a shower. I nodded slowly. Rachel called. Her hand froze mid-motion, fingers tangled in her hair. Oh, she said lightly. What about? She invited us to dinner Saturday. I watched her closely. A flicker of something shock, maybe calculation, flashed across her face before she covered it up with a laugh. Fine, right? She said, waving a hand. Yeah, I forgot to tell you. I was gonna go to her thing, but she told me it got moved. Figured I'd just have a quiet weekend instead. Lie. I knew it in my bones. That night, lying in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling while the soft hum of the fan filled the silence. Was I overreacting? Making something out of nothing? I wanted to believe that. I really did. But my gut told me otherwise. And I've never been the kind of man to ignore a gut feeling. Emily had always been careful. Careful with her words. Careful with her time. Careful with the little details in her stories. But not careful enough. The Wednesday after my call with Rachel, Emily told me she'd be going out with the girls after work, happy hour at some trendy wine bar in Paradise Valley, maybe a late dinner downtown. I acted like I didn't care. Like I was still the same trusting husband I'd always been. Sitting at the kitchen table, I watched as she reapplied her lipstick in the hallway mirror, adjusting the delicate gold necklace I'd given her for our 8th anniversary. You don't mind, do you? She asked, glancing at her reflection one last time. Of course not, I said, taking a slow sip of my beer. She smiled at me through the mirror. I won't be too late. Lie. I let her leave without a word, listening as the door clicked shut behind her. Then, I waited. Exactly 10 minutes. Enough time for her to get a reasonable distance away. Then, I grabbed my keys off the counter and headed to my truck. The 1970 Ford F-100 rumbled to life, steady as ever. That truck had been in my family for years. My dad bought it off an old rancher outside Amarillo, and when he passed, it became mine. I had rebuilt that truck piece by piece, fitted it with a rebuilt 350 small block V8, gave it a deep navy blue paint job, and stitched the leather bench seat myself. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Emily always said I should trade it in for something newer, something more practical. She preferred her Acura MDX Type S, a sleek silver hybrid SUV that blended in perfectly with the other polished company cars in her office parking garage. She liked things crisp, new, untouched. I like things built to last, things that, if broken, were worth fixing. As I pulled out of the driveway, I kept a few cars behind Emily, heading south toward downtown Phoenix. She drove the way she always did, calm, confident, never in a hurry. I followed her past deep Old Town Scottsdale, where neon bar signs flickered in the early evening haze, their glow bouncing off the pavement. We passed the American Airlines Center, where the Mavericks were playing that night, streets lined with fans in blue and silver jerseys. But Emily wasn't anywhere near a wine bar. I watched as she switched lanes, easing onto Cedar Springs Road, heading toward Uptown, where high-rises gave way to boutique hotels and overpriced restaurants. Then she slowed down. I let off the gas, watching as she pulled into the valet-only entrance of the Hotel Crescent Court, a luxury spot in the heart of Phoenix. The kind of place where a single night stay cost more than my old mortgage. A place no one checked into without a reason. Emily had a reason. I drove past, turning onto a side street and parking across from the guest entrance. From here, I had the perfect vantage point. The valet, the lobby doors, the wide windows stretching across the front of the hotel. I killed my headlights and settled in. The first 20 minutes were uneventful. A steady stream of hotel guests, business travelers stepping out of town cars, bellhops shaking hands, checking luggage. Nothing out of the ordinary. And then I saw him. He stepped out of the elevator in the hotel lobby, tall, sharp, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, looking like he belonged in a world of top-shelf whiskey and overpriced steak dinners. He checked his watch, smoothed his tie, and made his way toward the entrance. I leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel. My pulse pounded in my ears. The glass doors slid open. And there she was. Emily walked straight toward him. Something inside me fractured, a crack splitting deep in my chest. She wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't hesitating. She wasn't checking to see if anyone might catch her. She walked straight to him, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Like this was routine. Like they had done this before. Then, without a second of hesitation, he leaned in and kissed her. Not a quick peck. Not a brush of lips. A real kiss. And Emily, she melted into it. Her hand rested lightly on his chest, fingers curling just enough to let me know this wasn't some mistake. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Every part of me screamed to throw the truck in drive, to stop on the gas, to rip across the street and demand answers, to make a scene, to wipe that smug look off his face. But I didn't. I sat there, watching, learning, memorizing. Emily had no idea. She thought she was untouchable, moving through life without consequence. She didn't know that, at this moment, everything had changed. She had already lost. They disappeared into the hotel bar. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I had what I came for. I sat there a long time, the weight of it pressing down on me, my lungs feeling tight. My hands stayed locked on the steering wheel, my mind processing what I had just seen. I wasn't angry. Not in the way I expected to be. I was clear. Clear on what needed to happen next. Clear on how this was going to end. I drove home in silence, gripping the worn leather of my steering wheel like it was the only thing holding me together. Phoenix blurred past me in streaks of headlights and traffic signals, the humid night air pressing against my windshield. I didn't blast the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just let the truth settle in my chest, a weight I knew I'd carry until I did something about it. And I knew exactly what I needed. Evidence. Something undeniable. Something that wouldn't just confirm what I already knew, but would bury her in it. The next morning, I sat at my workshop desk, the scent of sawdust thick in the air. The wood grain under my hands felt solid, real, as I scrolled through my phone, searching for the one person I knew could help. Jack Malone. Retired Phoenix PD. A man with a gut instinct sharper than a hunting knife. He'd worked some of the biggest cases in the city before leaving the force to set up shop as a private investigator. Jack and I went back years. He had hired me once to build a custom bar top for his house, and we'd stayed in touch. More importantly, I trusted him, and I knew he could keep his mouth shut. I hit call. After 2 rings, his voice came through, low and gravelly, like he'd already smoked half a pack of Camels before breakfast. Tartar. Jack, I said. I need a favor. There was a pause. Something tells me this isn't about furniture. No, I said. It's about Emily. Another pause. Longer this time. Jack knew Emily. He knew me. He knew her lies. And he knew how much I had trusted her. What do you need? He asked finally. We met that afternoon at the Rustic, a laid-back bar just outside Uptown Phoenix. The kind of place where you could order a cold beer, a basket of smoked brisket nachos, and sit under the string lights while some guy with a guitar sang about Texas summers. Jack was already there when I arrived, a half-drunk Shiner Bock in front of him. He was in his late 50s, still built like a man who had spent years kicking down doors. His silver beard was trimmed short, the lines on his face deep, but his eyes were sharp. He looked up as I slid into the seat across from him. You look like hell, he said. I smirked. Appreciate that. He leaned back, studying me. Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about Rachel's phone call. About Emily's excuses. About the way she had waltzed into that hotel like she belonged there. I left out the part where I had wanted to floor the gas and drive straight through the front doors. But Jack already knew. When I finished talking, Jack let out a slow breath, running a hand through his beard. All right, he said. Here's how this works. I'll follow her, track her movements, get photos, timestamps, receipts, whatever I can dig up. Might take a couple of weeks, but when I'm done, you'll have everything you need. I nodded. Jack took a long sip of his beer, watching me over the rim of his glass. You sure you're ready for this, Carter? I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I wasn't. I didn't want this to be real. I wanted Jack to come back in a week and tell me I was wrong. That Emily was exactly who I had always believed she was. That there was some logical explanation for everything. But deep down, I knew better. So I looked him in the eye and said, "Yeah, I'm ready." 2 weeks passed. I went through the motions like nothing had changed. I woke up early, made coffee, went to my workshop, and poured myself into my work. I built a walnut dining table for a couple in Tucson, a custom bookshelf for a law office in Scottsdale. I filled my days with measurements, sandpaper, and sawdust, but my mind was somewhere else. Emily carried on as if nothing was different. She still kissed me on the cheek before heading to work. Still sent little texts during the day. "Hope you're having a good one. Thinking of you." But it was all just noise. Because I knew that, somewhere out there, Jack was watching. And he was seeing the truth. Then, on a Monday morning, my phone rang. "Meet me in my office," Jack said. "I got what you need." Jack's office was a hole-in-the-wall space on the second floor of an old brick building near Deep Old Town, Scottsdale. No sign. No receptionist. Just Jack, a desk buried under stacks of files, and the faint smell of stale coffee. When I walked in, he was sitting behind his desk, a manila folder in front of him. He didn't say a word, just slid it across to me. I picked it up, opened it. Photos. Emily. The Hotel Crescent Court. Walking in. Walking out. Same man. Different nights. Same damn row. I stared at them for a long time, my jaw clenched so tight I could feel my teeth grinding. Then I flipped to the next page. Receipts. Hotel charges. Dinners at Nick and Sam's Steakhouse. A bottle of wine from room service. It was all there. Undeniable. Jack leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice even. He pulled out another sheet. "Ryan Foster. Real estate developer. Works out of San Antonio but spends a lot of time in Phoenix. Married. 2 kids." I let out a slow breath. This wasn't some random guy. This wasn't one mistake. This was planned. Thought out. Emily hadn't just slipped up. She had built a whole separate life, one that didn't include me. Jack studied me carefully. "What do you want to do with this?" I closed the folder and stood up. "Take it to my lawyer." His name was Mark Benson, a divorce attorney out of Gilbert. The kind of guy who had seen every betrayal, every lie, every ugly ending. When I sat across from him and handed him the folder, he flipped through it with practiced indifference. Halfway through, he smirked. "She won't see a dime in the divorce." I nodded, rubbing a hand over my jaw. "Good. That's exactly what I wanted to hear." Emily had no idea. She still came home every night. Still gave me that absent-minded smile as she kicked off her heels in the entryway. Still kissed me on the cheek like nothing had changed. But everything had. She just didn't know it yet. Step 1. Move my money. Emily and I had a joint checking account at Bank of America, set up when we first got married. It's where our paychecks landed, where our bills got paid. But over the years, I had also kept a separate account for my woodworking business. That's where I started shifting the money. Slowly, carefully. I didn't want to drain the joint account overnight and set off alarms. So I moved it bit by bit, spreading it across a new private account at a small credit union in Tucson, the kind of place where you still knew the tellers by name, where no one asked too many questions. By the end of the first week, my name was the only one that mattered. Emily wouldn't notice. She wasn't the type to check balances. She just spent, assuming the money would always be there. But soon, it wouldn't be. Step 2, the house. I had bought our 3-bedroom house in North Phoenix before we were married. Back then, it was a modest fixer-upper, something I poured my sweat into, replacing floors, redoing cabinets, making it ours. When Emily moved in, she wanted changes. Expensive ones. New appliances. Marble countertops. Iron furniture. I went along with it, thinking we were building something permanent. But now, that house wasn't ours anymore. It was just a building, and I wasn't about to let her keep it. The title was still in my name alone, something Emily had never pushed to change. Back then, she probably thought it was romantic. The idea that she had married into a home already waiting for her. Now, it was about to belong to someone else. I called Steve Carter, an old high school buddy who now ran a brokerage in Scottsdale. How fast can you sell my house? Steve chuckled. Depends. How bad do you want to get out? Yesterday. He whistled. I can get a cash buyer. Might be under market value, but it'll be quick. That's fine. Within a week, I had a buyer. A young couple from Denver, moving to Phoenix for a new job. They loved the kitchen, the backyard, the modern rustic style Emily had insisted on. They saw a future here. I saw a past I was ready to walk away from. We signed the paperwork at a title office in Chandler. By the time Emily's girls' trip rolled around, the sale was finalized. She didn't know it yet, but she had exactly 1 week to vacate. Step 3. Atlanta. I needed a clean break. Not just from Emily. From everything. Phoenix had been my home for years. It's where I built my business. Where I thought I had built a life. But now? Every street. Every restaurant. Every damn road sign was a reminder of what she had done. I had to go. So I made some calls. Reached out to old contacts in the woodworking industry. And that's when I found Lawson & Sons Fine Furnishings, a high-end custom furniture shop just outside Atlanta, Georgia. They specialized in handcrafted furniture, solid oak dining tables, rich walnut bookshelves, intricately carved headboards. The kind of work that took patience, precision, and a steady hand. The kind of work I was damn good at. The owner, Robert Lawson, had been in the business for decades, but he was ready to retire. He needed someone to take over, someone who knew the craft inside and out. We talked for over an hour. By the time we hung up, his offer was clear. If you can get here by the end of the month, the job's yours. I didn't need to think about it. I'll be there, I told them. And just like that, my next chapter was set. The night before Emily left for her trip, I packed. Not in a rush, not in frustration, just calm, deliberate movements, like putting the final touches on a project that had taken far too long. I didn't take much, just my clothes, my tools, and a handful of personal belongings. Everything else? I left behind. Her designer handbags. Her rows of expensive shoes. The wine bottles stacked neatly in the kitchen. The framed wedding photos lining the hallway. I didn't touch a single thing. This wasn't some dramatic scene out of a movie where I burned the past or tore the place apart in anger. I just walked away from it all. Because, in the end, none of it mattered. Emily left for Savannah on Friday morning, her navy blue suitcase rolling behind her, like she was setting off for something exciting, something carefree. She had booked this trip weeks ago, a girl's getaway, a chance to sip overpriced cocktails on Bourbon Street and pretend, for a little while, that she was still 25. As she kissed my cheek, she barely looked at me. I'll call you when I land, she said, grabbing her Lexus keys off the counter. I leaned against the kitchen island, coffee in hand, and nodded. Have fun. She hesitated, maybe expecting me to ask more. Where you stay? Who's going? When will you be back? But I didn't. I just took a sip of my coffee, watched her walk out the door, and listened as she pulled out of the driveway. As soon as I heard her car disappear down the road, I set my mug down and wiped my hands on a dish towel. It was time. Everything had already been set in motion. The bank accounts were closed. The house was sold. The job in Atlanta was secured. All that was left was for me to walk away. I took a final walk through the house, taking in the details, not out of nostalgia, but to remind myself of what I was leaving behind. The wedding photos in the hallway, Emily in her white dress, me in a suit, both of us standing in front of a small chapel outside Tucson. I barely recognized those people anymore. The kitchen still smelled like vanilla and coffee, the way it always did in the mornings. The living room, arranged just the way Emily liked it, clean, modern, decorated with carefully placed throw pillows, felt like a showroom, not a full. It had always been built for her comfort, not mine. In the master bedroom, I took care of the final step. The bed was still made, the sheets tucked in perfectly, everything neat and in place. I walked over to Emily's dresser, pulled out an envelope, and set it beside her jewelry box. Inside, divorce papers, signed and ready to be filed. A full report from Jack, photos, receipts, every piece of proof she could never talk her way out of. The wedding ring I had once placed on her finger, the same one she had thrown away so easily. A formal notice that the house had been sold. Before I left, I added one last thing. A note, neatly placed next to her favorite perfume. Not a long, angry letter. Not a desperate explanation. Just 2 words. You lost. Emily would walk through that door expecting everything to be just as she left it. Instead, she'd find an empty house and a life she no longer controlled. I hadn't done this alone. Mark Benson, my lawyer, had taken care of everything, efficiently and quietly. The day I sat across from him in his Gilbert office, handing him the thick folder of evidence, he barely reacted as he flipped through it. Benny reached the photo of Emily at the Hotel Crescent Court, walking hand in hand with Ryan Foster, and let out a small chuckle. Well, he said, this makes my job a hell of a lot easier. From there, he moved fast. Texas was a community property state. The proof of adultery changed everything. Emily wouldn't get the house. She wouldn't get a penny of my business earnings. Mark made sure of that. By the time she saw those papers, he told me, she'll realize she has no ground to stand on. The house sale? Handled just as efficiently. Mark pushed the paperwork through before Emily even had a clue what was happening. The night before Emily left, we had dinner together. She sat across from me, eating her grilled salmon, sipping her white wine, talking about the trip ahead as if nothing was wrong. I nodded, made the right sounds, even smiled when necessary. But inside, I was already gone. By the time she landed back in Phoenix, her entire world would be unrecognizable. She just didn't know it yet. I loaded my last bag into the Chevy C10, wiped my hands on my jeans, and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine rumbled to life, steady as ever. I didn't look back as I pulled out of the driveway. The road stretched ahead, the morning sun breaking through the Phoenix skyline. I took the on-ramp to I-30 East, the city shrinking in my rearview mirror. Emily was probably settling into her first-class seat, ordering a mimosa, laughing with her friends. She thought she was escaping for a weekend of fun. She had no idea I was escaping for good. The first call came around noon. I ignored it. The second came a few hours later. Then a text. Hey, just landed. Hope you're having a good day. By the time I reached Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the messages changed. Hey, you there? By the time I crossed into Mississippi, the calls were more frequent, more urgent. And by the time she finally stepped through the front door, it wouldn't be hers anymore. By the time she realized just how completely I had left her behind, I would already be in Atlanta. Emily's flight landed at Phoenix/Tucson International Airport at 5:30 p.m. on Sunday. I knew this because I checked. Not out of doubt. Not because I cared. But because I wanted to picture the exact moment she realized everything was gone. I could picture her perfectly, striding off the jet bridge, sunglasses perched on her head, rolling her carry-on behind her, exhaustion creeping in from too much champagne and too many late nights in Savannah, French Quarter. She probably hadn't checked her phone much on the flight, assuming the calls and texts she sent over the last 2 days had just been ignored, that I was too busy to respond. She had no idea what was waiting for her. Not yet. The call started around 6 p.m. I was somewhere outside Montgomery, Alabama, the warm air rushing in through my open Chevy C10 window. I had stopped at a gas station off I-20, stretching my legs, grabbing a bottle of water, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Then my phone lit up. Emily. I let it ring. Another call. Then a text. Hey, just got home. Where are you? Another call. And another. I slid the phone into my pocket, stepped into the truck, and pulled back onto the highway. By 6:30 p.m., she was leaving voicemails. At first, annoyed. Ethan, seriously? Where are you? Did you go to your brother's or something? Call me back. Then frustrated. Okay, I don't know what's going on, but this isn't funny. If you're mad at me for going on this trip, just say so. Stop being childish. Then came the confusion. Why is all your stuff gone? Where's your truck? Ethan, what the hell is going on? I could see it all so clearly. Emily standing in the middle of the master bedroom, staring at the dresser where my clothes used to be, the empty nightstand, the half-bare closet where only her neatly arranged rows of dresses and high heels remained. The confusion deepening as she wandered through the house, noticing the small things missing. The leather chair I always sat in. The tools that once lined the garage wall. The coffee mug I used every morning. And then she would have seen it. The envelope. Still sitting neatly on her dresser, exactly where I had left it. By 7 p.m., the calls changed. The rage set in. What the hell is this, Ethan? You left me divorce papers? Are you out of your mind? What kind of coward does this? I swear, if you don't call me back right now. I turned the volume down on my phone and kept driving. By then, I had passed Columbus, Georgia, pushing toward Athens, Georgia. Neon signs from fast food joints flickered past. Truck stops. Gas stations. The hum of the highway stretching ahead. Emily was learning a hard lesson in real time. She wasn't in control anymore. By 8:30 p.m., the messages shifted again. The anger had burned out. Desperation took over. Ethan, please. We can fix this. Just talk to me. I don't know what you think you know, but it's not what it looks like. We have a life together. You can't just throw it all away. But I could. And I had. Somewhere around 9 p.m., I pulled off the highway and into a small roadside diner outside Charlotte. One of those places with red and white checkered floors, a menu that hadn't changed in decades, and a waitress who called everyone honorable. I slid into a booth, ordered a patty melt and fries, and let the hum of the diner settle around me. In Phoenix, Emily was unraveling. By now, she had seen the house sale notice. She had probably called the bank, only to find out her name was on none of the accounts anymore. Checked the garage. No truck. Checked my office. Found the documents finalized. Signed. She would call Rachel next. Maybe cry to her. Maybe scream. Maybe demand answers from Steve Carter, the real estate agent who had quietly handled the sale. But none of it would change a damn thing. Emily could call whoever she wanted. Nothing was going to undo what had already been set in motion. I finished my meal, left a 20 on the table, and stepped outside into the thick night air, heavy with the scent of rain. I was 6 hours from Atlanta. 6 hours from my new life. And I wasn't looking back. I had been in Atlanta for a month when Emily finally found me. By then, I had settled into a routine. Mornings at Lawson & Sons Fine Furnishings. Long afternoons in the workshop. Evenings on the back porch of my rental house just outside Roswell, Georgia. It wasn't Phoenix. And that was the point. Phoenix had been a life I thought was unshakable. A house I thought would always be mine. A marriage I believed in. But Atlanta was a fresh start. For the first time in a long time, I felt good. So when Emily showed up, she didn't find me miserable and alone. She found me thriving. That Saturday, I was leading a woodworking seminar at Lawson & Sons. Robert Lawson had asked me to teach a class on hand-carved furniture details, a specialty of mine. The shop was packed. 15, maybe 20 people gathered around as I demonstrated how to shape walnut and oak into intricate designs. The air smelled of fresh sawdust, and the steady hum of power tools in the background made it feel like home. But before the seminar started, before I even set foot in the shop that morning, Emily had already found me. She had probably tracked me down through social media, a Google search, for one last desperate call to someone who still knew me. And when she got there, she didn't just find me. She found Maddie. Maddie Brooks had been one of the first people I met in Atlanta. She ran a small antique restoration shop next door, specializing in vintage furniture repairs and refinishing. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had zero tolerance for bullshit. Emily was the kind of woman who expected the room to shift when she walked in. Maddie was the kind of woman who didn't care. She didn't need attention. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that came from knowing exactly who she was. I liked that about her. We had clicked almost immediately, bonding over wood grain patterns, old tools, and the kind of craftsmanship most people overlooked. So when Emily arrived in Atlanta, expecting to find me broken, she was in for a shock. Because the first thing she saw was me, standing outside the shop. Laughing was Maddie. It was a small moment, but it was enough to stop Emily cold. I had just stepped outside the shop, brushing sawdust off my jeans, when Maddie reached over and dusted off my sleeve. A casual gesture. Something a friend would do without a second thought. But to Emily? It was something else entirely. I didn't notice her at first. Didn't realize she was standing across the street, watching. Maddie smiled, shaking her head. "You're a mess, Carter." I chuckled, running a hand through my hair. Yeah, it's part of the charm." She rolled her eyes but grinned, turning toward the door. As she stepped inside, I followed, resting my hand lightly on the small of her back for just a second as I passed. A simple gesture. Nothing intimate. Nothing grand. But for Emily, that moment broke her. Because in that split second, she saw the truth. I wasn't waiting for her. I wasn't sitting in some dark apartment, drowning in regret. I had moved on. And that's when she stormed into my seminar. The second she walked for the door, I felt it. Even before I saw her. The air in the room shifted. Conversation stopped. Students paused mid-motion, tools in hand. The steady hum of the shop suddenly seemed too loud. I turned, and there she was, Emily, standing in the doorway, dressed in a fitted blazer too put together for someone who had just driven 8 hours from Phoenix. Her expression was tight with anger. And something else. Desperation. I set down my chisel, dusted off my hands, and met her gaze. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. She had expected something different. She had expected a broken man. A man who would be shocked to see her, who would demand answers, who would feel the pull of the past. Instead, she saw me. Steady, calm, unaffected. And that shattered whatever plans she had in her head. Her hands trembled slightly as she stepped forward, past the rows of students, past the half-finished projects and workbenches. Ethan. Her voice was just loud enough to cut through the murmurs. I crossed my arms. Emily. She swallowed. She hadn't thought this far ahead. She had come here expecting a fight. Maybe anger. Maybe heartbreak. Maybe even relief. What she hadn't expected. For me to look at her like a stranger. I could see it in her eyes. She had no idea what to say next. For the first time in her life, Emily was completely out of control. From the back of the shop, Maddie stepped forward. She glanced between me and Emily, then arched a brow. Need a minute? Her voice was even, unreadable. I nodded. Yeah, I'll be back in a bit. She gave Emily one last look, then turned and disappeared into the storage area. Emily followed her with her eyes, her lips pressed into a tight line. When she turned back to me, there was fire behind her gaze. I sighed. Already tired. What do you want, Emily? She hesitated, shifted on her heels, and then she said it. I made a mistake. I exhaled slowly, resting my hands on the edge of the workbench. There it was, the last-ditch effort, the final plea. She had come all this way, convinced that if she could just talk to me, if she could just explain, everything could be undone. But what Emily didn't realize, there was nothing left to undo. That part of my life? Already gone. She stood stiffly, arms crossed, her nails tapping against her forearm. Her eyes locked onto me, sharp enough to cut steel. She wasn't just upset. She was furious. I let out a slow breath, already done with this conversation before it even started. Who is she? She snapped. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. I followed her glare toward Maddie, who was wiping down a workbench at the back of the shop. Then I turned back to Emily, meeting her stare without flinching. My suture. My voice was calm. Even. Emily's nostrils flared. The woman who had lied to me. Who had walked into a hotel with another man without a second thought. Who had spent weeks leaving voicemails filled with rage and desperation. She was standing in front of me now, expecting me to explain myself. The irony of it nearly made me laugh. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. So that's it. she hissed. You just run off to another state, start a new life, and replace me? I let out a humorless chuckle. You replaced me first, Emily. Her jaw tightened. She had no comeback for that. She knew it was true. So she changed tactics. Her voice softened. Her expression shifted, just enough to remind me of the woman I used to love. Ethan. She murmured my name like it meant something. You know this isn't right. We had a life together. A real one. I ran a hand through my hair. We had something, Emily. My voice was steady. But whatever it was, you ended it. She blinked, cut off guard. For the first time since she walked through that door, I saw doubt flicker across her face. She was scrambling, searching for anything to pull me back in. And then, she played her final card. I'm pregnant. The words dropped like a hammer in the silent shop. I didn't even blink. Because I had been expecting this. Emily had never been the type to let go without a fight. And now, with nothing left, no house, no financial leverage, no control over me, she had turned to the one thing she thought would force me back into her life. I studied her carefully. Her lips parted slightly, waiting for my reaction. She expected shock. She expected hesitation. She expected me to doubt everything I had built since leaving her. Instead, my voice remained calm. Then we'll need a paternity test. Emily's expression cracked. Just for a second. Long enough for me to see the truth flash across her face. The panic. The realization that I wasn't going to blindly believe her. That her trap had already failed. She recovered quickly, shaking her head, forcing a scoff. Are you serious? She snapped. You think I'd lie about something like this? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her defensiveness was the answer. Emily had always been a good liar. Smooth. Confident. Always knowing exactly what to say to make people believe her. But this wasn't just another excuse. This was something she couldn't manipulate her way out of. She took a breath, trying one last time. Ethan. Her voice softened, reaching out as if to touch my arm. This baby is yours. We can know. I stepped back before she could finish. Hit the test, Emily. Her hand froze midair, her expression twisting into something between rage and desperation. She had been so sure this would work, that this was the one card she could play to pull me back in. But Emily never understood something about me. I don't play games I know I can't win. And this was a game she had already lost. 3 weeks later, the test results came in. By then, I had nearly forgotten about it. Life in Atlanta had settled into an easy rhythm. Mornings spent in the workshop at Lawson and Sons, my hands shaping oak and walnut into pieces that would outlast me. Evenings on the back porch of my rental house, cicadas humming in the Georgia heat, a cold beer in hand. Emily's desperation had faded into the background. Until that morning, I stepped into the post office in Roswell, Georgia, the bell over the door jingling as I approached the counter. The envelope was waiting in my P.O. box, just like I knew it would be. I didn't open it right away. I walked outside, into the crisp fall air, leaning against my Chevy C10, the same truck that had carried me out of Phoenix and into this new life. I ran my thumb along the edge of the envelope. Then I tore it open. One single sheet of paper. Paternity exclusion. The baby was of mine. I let out a slow breath, neatly folding the paper and slipping it back inside. This was it, the last thread Emily might have had. And now? Now she had nothing. That evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily showed up at my door. I had expected it. She had seen the results. She knew the second she read that paper that there was no more leverage, no more control. So here she was. I opened the door. Emily stood there, arms crossed, her face pale, still holding on to that last sliver of defiance. She had dressed well. Black heels. A crisp white blouse. Hairstyle just enough to look effortlessly put together. She had probably spent hours in front of the mirror, convincing herself she could still walk back into my life and take back what she had thrown away. I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside and let her in. She paced the small living room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors, before finally turning to face me. You don't have to say it, she said, voice tight. I already know what's in that envelope. I nodded, tossing it onto the coffee table between us. Then why are you here, Emily? She inhaled sharply. I can see it. The rehearsed speech she had practiced in the car, running through her head like a battle plan. Then she said it. Because this doesn't have to be the end. Her voice wavered, just a little. We can fix this, Ethan. I let out a slow breath. Fix what, exactly? She stepped forward, her expression cracking just enough to let the real emotion slip through. I made a mistake, she whispered. But that didn't erase everything. She was pleading now, reaching for something that no longer existed. I shook my head. No, Emily. You undid everything we had. Her lower lip trembled, but she clenched her jaw, fighting to hold on to whatever battle she thought she was still in. I was confused, she tried again. I didn't mean to hurt you. I laughed, shook my head. You weren't confused when you walked into that hotel, Emily. You weren't confused every time you lied to my face. She swallowed hard, blinking fast. Ethan, please. I didn't let her finish. I reached for the envelope, lifted it, and held it out to her. Guess that's that. Her knees buckled slightly. Her fingers trembled as she took the envelope from me. I can see it now, the full weight of everything hitting her all at once. She had lost her husband, her scene, her financial stability, even the illusion that she still had control. She had nothing left. Her eyes welled up. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, one last excuse, one last plea. But nothing came, just silence. I walked to the door and pulled it open. You should go. She hesitated. For the longest moment, she just stood there, staring at me, like she was seeing me for the first time. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret, just nothing. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she stepped outside. She lingered, staring at the street like she didn't know where to go next. Then, finally, she walked away. I closed the door. Leaning against it, I let out a slow breath. From the kitchen, I heard a quiet chuckle. I looked up. Maddie, leaning against the counter, a mug of coffee in her hands, watching the whole thing unfold. She raised an eyebrow. That was something. I exhaled, shaking my head. Yeah. She took a slow sip of coffee. You okay? I glanced toward the window, watching as Emily disappeared down the street, her heels clicking against the pavement. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. And for the first time in a long time, I knew my answer. Yeah, this time, I meant it. No second chances. What do you say? Was Emily's last-ditch effort with the pregnancy predictable? Or did it catch you off guard? If you enjoyed the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.